That's the age-friendly Edmonton Lunch and Learns. We're so glad that you could join us today by Zoom. And my name is Kathy Harvey. I am a co-chair of the Age-Friendly Edmonton Ageism Hub. This event is brought to you by Age-Friendly Edmonton, an initiative of the Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Council, supported by the City of Edmonton. Age-Friendly Edmonton is part of a global movement to build age-friendly cities and communities, and is a city that recognizes the diverse populations and needs of seniors and actively supports their inclusion, engagement, and well-being.
AHS says the change is based on an extensive review of
For the land acknowledgement, we'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 and on the traditional lands of the Cree, Blackfoot, Iroquois, Dene, Nakota, Sioux, Métis, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe nations, and we acknowledge and respect the past, present, and future generations of all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who continue to strengthen our community. For a bit of housekeeping, please keep muted for the duration of the presentation. This session will be recorded and can be viewed later on Edmonton Seniors Coordinating Council's YouTube channel. See link in the chat. We will not be having a live Q&A after this presentation. However, if you have comments or questions for the host or the administrators, feel free to do that in the chat. If you would like access to the live transcript, please do so by clicking on the live transcript at the bottom of your toolbar. Now, I'd like to welcome our panelists. A warm extension of welcome from us to you, our volunteer panelists who are joining us today. So I'll introduce our four panelists. The first is Tom Hodgson. He's retired from the federal government, having worked in agriculture, and is a member of the Lions Club for over 50 years. So welcome, Tom. The next up is Jamie McDonald. She's a master's student in the Department of Human Ecology at the University of Alberta. She's working on her second degree and is specializing in aging. Welcome, Jamie. Next up is Tammy Halloum. She's a certified Zentangle teacher. You can probably, we can ask her about that, and a certified healthcare musician. Tammy loves creativity in all forms and has found joy in her expertise and shares her talents, bringing joy and peace to others. Welcome, Tammy. We have Mira Kazam, who was born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and she likes to be known for the fact that she is Islami Muslim. She's a fourth-year Bachelor of Social Work student with the University of Calgary and is passionate about seniors' care. So welcome, Mira. So now, last but not least, we have our moderator, who's Dorothy Lowry, and she is also a co-chair of our Age-Friendly Edmonton Ageism Hub. So over to you, Dorothy.
Okay, welcome everyone, and we're really excited today to provide this, one of our first events that we've put on for our Lunch and Learns that spans different generations. So to start off, I had the panel do an exercise that I found in a book recently. The book is actually called The Spirituality of Age, and you'll find the name and the names of the authors in the chat if you're interested. In this book, one of the authors suggests that an easy way to look at our assumptions around aging is to do an exercise. And that exercise is to imagine that you see an older woman sitting alone on a park bench, staring into space. So what I had the panel do was to actually do the exercise, but to have them think of what they would think or what their assumptions would be if they saw an older woman on the park bench or a younger woman on the park bench. So Megan, can you please bring up that first slide? So it was a little unfair because I didn't actually show them a picture, but here you see, perhaps two pictures of who you might run across sitting on the park bench in the park. And on the next slide, I've captured a few of their responses. So it would be a good exercise for everyone who's on this program today, listening in, to think of what your words would be that you would use to describe these people if you didn't know them, if you didn't know anything about them. So one of the big responses, and certainly I put it in the middle of the two slides, would be, well, it would depend on what I see. So I just wanted to point that out, is that often our impressions of someone is very visual, and that imagine piece makes it a little bit harder. So some of the things that the panelists thought of were, well, maybe it's all positive. Maybe she's lost in thought, reminiscing, daydreaming, enjoying, and that could be for both. On the other hand, it could be she's lonely, depressed, she's had a loss. And then the question is, what's she thinking? Is she okay? Should I approach her? And that can go to both ages. So one of the outcomes of this exercise is to use it to sort of frame your own assumptions about someone who's older or someone who's younger. So now we're going to move on to our panel questions. And what I'll be doing is I'll start randomly with one of the panelists. And the first question is, can you describe any of your life experiences that you think might lead to your assumptions about when a person might appear old to you? And I'll start with Tom.
Okay. Well, in my experience, yes, I have in some ways, because right now I'm a driver for a person who actually uses a walker, is very frail looking, and actually when she uses the walker, she's in a slouch. So I tend to think of her as being old and looks that manner. So that's when a person appears old, I think that's one of the ones that I would look at.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And Mira.
Yeah, so some of my experiences include, being a caregiver for my grandparents, for example, even though my grandma may be younger, kind of when they are no longer to be able to have that independence anymore and they need that support. For me, that's kind of how I see a person as old, kind of someone who was independent, but now is unable to remain independent and needs that support.
Great. And Tammy.
I would say mine would be similar to Mira's. People who are not able to get around as easily as maybe they could before. So, or if they look very thin and frail, I think of that as being older.
Okay. And Jamie.
So I approached this question a little bit differently. Based on my experience of being a family member of parents who were in their 40s when they had me, and growing up surrounded by older grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins who are quite a bit older than I am. I've been around older people my whole life, and I think that that's changed the way that I see older people. It took away a lot of the fear that I think I might have had in interacting with older adults if I had not had that experience. But to me, I just see my family members as, mom, dad, grandma, not as older people. They're just my family. That's just who they are. But I think my problem is that sometimes that also transfers to other older adults that I come into contact with that are not my family. I just view them as people, not as older people.
Okay, great. All right, so I think you can see that a lot of times our impression of someone being older can be based on their looks and also based on whether or not they can still live independently. But on the other hand, there's the case where you've had exposure within your own family to older people. And in that case, you don't look at others that way. You see something different, even though they may have that visual look of frailty. And I think that's something important to think about, is that are we just looking at the person and making our impressions based on the visual of what we think is someone who is old? Okay, the next question lends itself to the subject of ageism. And the question is, if you've ever experienced ageism, and if you have, how you handled it, or if you don't think you've actually ever had an experience of ageism, is there something within your character, something that you do when you're faced with a situation that could be ageist that actually deflects it? So we're going to start with Mira on this question.
Awesome. So through my personal experiences, recognizing that I am not an older adult and I am in my 20s, for example, working in the senior sector and being involved in the senior sector and getting involved in the senior sector is intimidating because, for example, my YEG Seniors project team and I decided to do a grant project working with another external local community organization, and they were all about it. And then when we started working together and collaborating with one another, they were telling us that we don't have much experience, we don't know maybe what we're doing, kind of treating us in a way where we may not know as much as them, which could be very true. And after that conversation and after going through the steps with this grant project, they decided that they no longer wanted to work with us and that we should gain more experience. We then went to work with another organization in the city, and we did 350 baskets for seniors for that organization that were able to, kind of see us as partners, kind of having that equal similarity and kind of understanding and giving us that opportunity as youth to get involved in the senior sector. Because when we want youth to get involved with older adults and in that demographic that you need that experience, we need to be provided with opportunities, right, to even be involved. So that was one thing that we truly appreciated, but it was also a learning experience.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Tammy.
Okay, I haven't really experienced ageism. I guess the one thing that I want to try and do to avoid getting into that age-based situations is try and look at people as individuals rather than how old they are. Granted, people who are older than me have a lot more experience than I do, and that's something that I can learn from. So it's basically meeting people one-on-one where they are and trying to not make an assumption just because they look a certain way or, talk a certain way. Sometimes you have to have more patience if people talk slower, but you can always gain something from that experience as long as you're going into it being open about meeting that person and leaving your, I guess, assumptions at the door.
Okay, thank you. And Jamie.
So I'm sort of a combination of Tammy and Mira. I don't think I've ever actually experienced ageism. There is an incident that comes to my mind in the workplace, but I can't tie it directly to ageism, so I'm not going to say that it was if it wasn't. But I think the best strategy for me to avoid ageism has been educating myself about it, so that I can spot it when it occurs and politely challenge it and try to inform other people that maybe their behaviors are ageist as well. And I think that's a strategy that's worked well for me.
Okay, thank you. And Tom.
Yeah, when I tried to do this on a personal basis, I quickly thought about 3 different items. I'll quickly go through it. At one time, it used to be that one had to retire at 65. But that's not the case anymore. So, that's one of the things that we had to put up with. Another one that I think about is every week, if you look at some of the pharmacies around, there's a 20% discount for seniors. Why not every day? That type of thing. And just recently, many of you wouldn't know, but I had a heart attack 2 years ago. In order to renew my driver's license, I had to have a driver's medical. Well, guess what? I thought that was good because I would be good for a year. However, this year I got another notice in the mail from Alberta government saying, since you've turned 75, you have to have another driver's medical. So therefore, I felt that because of my age, I had to, go ahead and get that medical in order to renew my license. And I thought, well, medical should be available for a whole year, but I guess it's not. So yeah, in some ways I'd like to be able to try and fight it and accept it, because when you're younger, you don't have to have medical every year and do those things. And all I said to when I asked my sons about that, when I was out with them, they said, good luck trying to fight the government. So yeah, there we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And going to the question of the government, one of the things I think that we're seeing start to crop up in our society in terms of, I guess, ageism power or anti-ageist power is that there's a lot of initiatives happening right now with the government to try to address ageism as well. And it's one of the areas where they're putting some information out online, and you can actually find things on the federal government site now that are initiatives looking at addressing ageism. So I think, Tom, your point there is probably a good one. And that's one of the things that needs to be brought to their attention when it appears that a rule, is actually ageist. The whole idea as well of retiring at 65, goes back such a long ways and is such a tradition in our society, because when it was brought into place, companies back in those days actually didn't expect you to live very far past the age of 65. So they didn't actually think that they were going to have to pay you, if they were going to pay you any kind of benefit after you turned 65, they weren't going to pay you for very long. So that has certainly changed in our society. And there are, depending on the company that you look at, companies around that are changing their view. Another thing I think that I really heard coming from Mira is that whole area of giving younger people that opportunity to learn. Particularly, I think when, as Jamie mentioned in her answer to the first question, when you've had exposure in your life to older people within your family, you often have skills available that maybe other people don't. if they haven't had that exposure. And like everything in life, you're not going to learn until you have that opportunity. So to open things up and to actually allow them to see and hear, your feelings about being older or about your experiences. And that's really one of the reasons why we have these lunch and learns, is to bring that forward. Tammy talked about, the importance to treat people as individuals, regardless of your age. And that again is so important, because every person's life experience has been different. Their health situation is different. Their living situation is different. So to, say that, everyone who has a walker is old and, has a hearing problem or something, it is not true. I mean, when my mom had a walker, she was, I can tell you, pretty darn feisty with it. And in fact, she needed to get out of her road. So things like that. Jamie mentioned, did she have an experience in the workplace? And actually, ageism problems in the workplace are one of the #1 issues where they are seeing ageism. So those companies now where they're hiring rules, and we hear that very often about people who are older and are applying for jobs and are discounted immediately, or it can go the other way. People who are younger, who, particularly if they are being hired by, say, an older person. One of the things I used to coach students on when I was teaching at NAET and trying to help them preparing for jobs was to actually let them know that they needed to research very carefully the age of the person who is going to interview them, because that age could determine a lot of things, their experiences in life, how they were going to approach them, if they're younger, if that's their first job. So, it's something that I think we all have to think about. And the importance, finally, that Jamie mentioned about education. So educating ourselves about our own assumptions about ageism, which this session is intended to prompt you to do, and also to politely challenge it. So if you have a situation, how do you politely deal with it so that you're not instigating a bigger situation that becomes harder, or a conflict that becomes harder for you to deal with? So all some really good points. So thank you for your answers to that question. So the next question changes the topic a little bit, but it feeds into the topic of ageism. So isolation is often assumed to be an experience primarily of older people within our society. So the first part of it is asking whether or not you agree with that. And then as a second part of that is whether or not you actually have experienced isolation and how you dealt with it. So since the assumption is that it's experienced by primarily older people, I'm going to start with our 2 younger members of the panel. And so Jamie, what would be your response to the issue of isolation?
I would say to a certain extent that yes, I do agree with that assumption. I remember reading a piece of literature years ago on a project that I was working on from Statistics Canada that stated that at that time, and I think it was written in about 2009, that the loneliness rate among older adults in Canada was 25%, which meant that 1 in 4 older adults were experiencing loneliness at that time, which is quite a high proportion. And I heard, I think the most recent figure, that it was 40% of older people. But my other side of this question is also that I don't think it's only older people that experience loneliness. It can happen to anyone of any age at any time.
Okay, and Jamie, how was your experience during COVID? Did you have anything to reflect on there in terms of how you dealt with the isolation that we all experienced during COVID?
Yes, sorry, I didn't realize we were doing them all at once.
That's okay.
Yes, I did experience isolation. And for me, the thing to do was just to talk to someone, whether it was in person or over the phone, family members or friends. And I also just found that getting out of the house, even if it was just to go grocery shopping or run errands or to go for a walk and see other people, reminded me that I wasn't alone and brought me a lot of comfort. And then I don't think that COVID was only a problem, or that isolation was only a problem because of COVID. I think that it existed before that, and that COVID brought it to the forefront of public consciousness. But now that COVID is so-called over, I think it's fading back out of public consciousness again.
Okay, thank you. And Mira.
Jamie, you bring such a great point, and I completely agree with Jamie to a certain extent also. And I liked how you talked about the walking, because I've never seen many people out for walks like I did during COVID. Everyone was out and about walking around. It was great. But working with seniors, one thing I've noticed in kind of getting their feedback, we're actually working on a project, doing a documentary about through the eyes of seniors through COVID-19. Just this past weekend, and interviewing these seniors, we were asking them, how was it? What were your experiences? Were you isolated? And when you live in a retirement community, in a long-term care facility, you know, that has COVID outbreaks where you're no longer able to leave your room, right? It's a different scenario than when you are living in the community and you have that independence. You're able to still have that support with your family members, or you're just solely independent, right? When we look at people who are widowed, right? Like, how many support systems do they have compared to people who, you know, have a significant other in their life that they can rely on? And I think that, again, we can't assume that all seniors experience loneliness and isolation, but it is prominent in our older adult population, right? When we look at younger generations, when we look at even the mid-age generation, we're constantly, most of us are going to work. We have school, right? A lot of other seniors could be retired, right? So also the daily activities can also differ, right? Which makes it who's busier, who has more spare time, right? So kind of touching on those topics. And I think that during COVID, we were able to kind of spotlight an issue that was already going on. You know, seniors in isolation was an issue before COVID, but it was more prominent and highlighted during COVID. And that's when more people wanted to give back into their communities, write cards for seniors, call seniors over the phone once a week, right? So these are some of the projects that we in the Seniors Project, we did organize just to bridge that gap and make sure that there was support system from the community.
Okay, thanks, Mira. And Tom.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I tend to agree with that statement as well, because when people retire, you know, they tend to be isolated a little bit more. And as you get older and things like that, as Mira said, you know, you may end up in a long-term care or something like that, and isolation may feel a little bit more, because where are your friends nowadays? Unless you get out and socialize more with the people around you. So the thing is too, but young people can fit into that same situation where they could be isolated as well, just as much as older people. It could be for health reasons, mental health reasons, or anything like that. So it just doesn't affect the older generation. As far as experiencing isolation, yeah, initially during COVID, I think when it first started, we had to isolate. We were in our own. Well, we were away from at that time, but on holidays, but we had to stay in our own unit. We couldn't get out as much. And when we did get out, of course, masking was a criteria. Lineups were around, but that's just the thing. In order to fight some of that or get away from that, we did venture out. We did go for walks. We did venture out and do small errands on well, on a regular basis. So that was one of the ways that we could go ahead and, well, be available to go ahead. Socializing was a big thing. And even as we gain more experience with Zoom meetings and Google Docs meetings or whatever, Google meetings, or things like that, that social contact was important as well. Even though we, you could see people face to face. I think that was important as well. So do you think isolation was only a problem because of COVID? It just manifested the problem. I think it's just been said, it's not necessarily only during COVID. It was a norm there for, in fact, right now, I know an elderly couple, and I use the word elderly too, that are still isolating. So, and they are not getting out at all. And so, yeah, it's, we live with it, we work with it, and do our best. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Tammy.
Okay. I don't agree that it's primarily the older people in our society that experience isolation. I think anyone at any age can experience isolation, whether it's self-imposed or how society itself treats them, or their experiences with how society treats them. That can cause like an isolation that the person themselves has put on themselves. I do think that COVID brought this further forward for all people, like all ages, because depending on the type of personality you are, whether or not you have other outside interests that or hobbies, if you don't have any of that, then I think the isolation really does hit home. People who were single and didn't have a huge friend base, that didn't have access to Zoom or, calling other people, I think they would have been impacted from the isolation from COVID. Myself during COVID, I would say I experienced a little bit of isolation, but I also have a lot of other hobbies that I do. My music, my drawing. I did a lot of Zoom classes at the time and kept myself busy. And I found things that I could do that were inexpensive and didn't cost a lot of money. But like I said, like I know from the perspective of my mother, she reads and watches TV and plays on the computer. Well, if you can't go out and walk, or you can't go out and meet with other people, those three things get boring pretty quickly. So, being able to talk to your friends and family, I think is an important part of that. But I do know that she experienced a little bit of isolation from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So some interesting discussion, and I really like Mira's point about the fact that it was the seniors often who were in the retirement centers that are living in a retirement center that had a harsher time, in that they then became isolated to a single room. And so when you think about that, and they couldn't see family. And I know for myself, I actually had an aunt who was in a senior home at that time, and we tried to do meetings, with her through the window. And a problem was, she had a bit of dementia, so she didn't really understand ever what was going on. She kept asking us, why can't you come in? Why can't you come in? And it, I think impacted a whole lot of things, because, those seniors homes and senior centers, they also rely a lot on volunteerism. And of course, the volunteers couldn't come in, nor could family. So, I think it really brought our eyes open to the fact that the assumption that people are not isolated just because they're living in a senior's home or a nursing home is not the truth. And if you're interested actually in watching a kind of fun movie that brings that point home, if you find the movie called The Mole Agent, and I'll put that in the chat, it actually is in Spanish with English subtitles, but it's about a man who goes undercover, an older man who's hired to go undercover in a seniors center because one of the daughters of a person in the senior center thinks that their mother is being abused. And as a bit of a spoiler, the end of the movie is very interesting because he finds that, and his report actually says this, if the daughter is so concerned, maybe she, as well as all of the other families of the people who are in those nursing homes, should go visit once in a while. So the problem is not the actual treatment they're getting in the nursing home, the food that they're getting, the activities that are available to them. It's the fact that people don't visit them. And of course, with COVID, that was forced onto people, right? Some of the other things, that we talked about here is, it spotlighted the fact that of seniors living in isolation. But as Tom mentioned, it's not just a problem in our society for seniors. I'm going to say young senior, how's that? But I'm single. And so for me, it was a huge problem. And, my other underlying problem was I had worked for 34 years in IT and was on the computer every day, all day. And the thought of living my life on Zoom was not one that I had first embraced, but I had to, because if I wanted to actually interact with people, I had to have, Zoom. So the other thing is that the people that have mobility issues, whether they're young or old, or, really deal with trouble when it comes to isolating circumstances, because it's the people that can get out to walk, that can get out and enjoy nature, and, and I forget whether it was Jamie or Miriam who mentioned this, just to get out and have, someone nod at you as you're walking along. And, that's why I really liked and was impressed with the answers to our question about if you see someone on the park bench, the people that said, well, I might approach and just say hello. And I know one day during COVID, I was out for a walk and there was a young man sitting on a park bench, and there was just something that I felt disturbed me with the way he was sitting there. And I asked him, I said, hi, are you okay? Do you need to say hello to somebody? And he just laughed and said, oh, no, he says, I'm fine. But afterwards, I thought, before COVID, I probably wouldn't have done that. So, if you think someone needs help, to reach out. And so our last question for today comes to suggestions. If you have any suggestions of how our society can open and improve communications and basically work against ageist assumptions between the different age groups. And I'm going to start with Tammy on this one.
I guess my biggest thing would be to take everyone as an individual. Like, look at people as individuals and don't look at them based on the color of their hair, you know, their age. I think that's very important. And just being open to getting to know people. I think that's something that we as a society have kind of gotten away from. Everyone kind of stays in their own little box and doesn't really, you know, say hi to someone else or, you know, smile when you're walking by. And doing that with others can bring kind of a highlight to a day. Like if, you know, you're walking down the street and you smile at someone or you kind of nod your head and or say hi, that could make someone's day just because they haven't talked to anybody or they're going through a rough time, and someone just acknowledging that they're there and that they're not on their own, that they are a part of a community. And I think bringing community programs to the forefront, because I don't know, and I'm not just talking for older people, I'm talking for all people. Like I know even in our community, I live in rural Alberta, and you know, our school in town has closed down, so the kids now have to go to another community to go to school. Well, they have isolation as well because they can't play with their friends. They have to get on a bus and drive, you know, 45 minutes on the bus and get home at, you know, 5 o'clock at night and time for supper, bed, and so forth. So it's not just older people, it can be with any age. And just having those community programs or the chance to, you know, go and say hi to someone.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. And we'll go to Jamie next.
Sorry, I got booted off earlier. What was the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. So if you have any suggestions about how our society can open and improve communications, really with a goal to change ageist assumptions between the different age groups.
Okay, great. Yes, I think education, as I said before, is key. Educating yourself and educating others, particularly government officials, as in people like our former premier, who had said that, you know, when the older adults at the beginning of the pandemic had died, they'd lived long lives and life was expendable. That's clearly ageist and probably not something people should be saying. So I think if we can identify ageism and label it for what it is and explain to others why it's not acceptable is the main thing. I had a family member once who was in a medical lab and she was using a wheelchair because she has some mobility issues. And another family member was with her, and the lab tech at the lab was talking to the other family member and not to the family member that was the patient. And the first family member tried to redirect the conversation to the patient, but didn't actually express that it was ageism. So the person couldn't necessarily learn from that situation. So I think if you clearly say, still in a nice way, that it is ageism, then that opens up channels for changing your mind. And also more intergenerational opportunities. I'm part of an intergenerational theater company here in Edmonton. And it's university students and older adults working together to create plays. And I think that having more opportunities like that is also a great strategy. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And Tom, to you next.
Yeah, giving it some thought, you know, as I'm a volunteer and have had for several years at different organizations, but as a big brother, by, you know, into the schools and helping out with a little brother and that type of thing. But as well as when I moved to Edmonton, I went ahead and I was helping out at one of the outdoor activities at my granddaughter's school. But that ended up as well as going and staying in the school a little bit longer to help out with the teachers with some of the students, almost like a tutor, helping them out with reading or math or something like that. So I'm thinking that we need to encourage older adults as well as younger, you know, people to become volunteers in more organizations. I don't know how we can do that. I'm thinking of the schools. Maybe we could open it up. The schools could open up to more of the mentors and tutors to help young people with problems or anything like that. It could be English as a second language, or in some cases, it's like grandparents to students and just help them along. It doesn't, whether it's in a school, it could be maybe an after school activity to help out with students as well, through any organization. So yeah, I think everyone could help in that manner. I mean, it's just like going to reading week during this school program. I do it, and my wife does it because we enjoy it, but we know it also helps. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Mira, over to you.
Yeah, awesome question. So it all goes back to not only recognizing that ageism is a social construct, but it has to do with how the systems in society were also created, right? And I think that's important to acknowledge. So we can change everyone to be accepting and to recognize ageism, but we also have to, promote change and initiative and action for the systems to also change their ways, right? So it's all about learning and unlearning, like Jamie mentioned before. And even, for example, I wanted to share through YEG Seniors Project, we are all about intergenerational engagement. So one of our programs is companion calls. So we do weekly phone calls from students or whichever demographic you may be, to call seniors at a local retirement facility. And we had, I kid you not, about like 40, 50 applicants from more of a younger demographic, but we also had some older people also to just call seniors. And it was so hard for the seniors to accept the younger people calling, just because they thought that it was coming from a place of like, oh, they're pitying me, they feel bad for me, they don't actually want to talk to me, they're just feeling bad. So kind of even going and reevaluating, how are we approaching it when we're talking about intergenerational volunteering opportunities, right? You're helping a student, right? You're helping a student even connect to you. These students wrote about why they wanted to do this. I've lost a grandparent. I've never had any older adult figure in my life. I want to give back to the community. And it's all about coming back to the fact that providing opportunities for youth to get engaged with our older adult demographic is what is needed in the community, right? To kind of bridge that gap between generations is important. And again, technology also, right? When we were even developing this program, I see everyone here is on Zoom, right? You have the access to Zoom, you have that knowledge, which is amazing. But a lot of older adults, even my grandparents who are from, other countries, who are newcomers to Canada, who are immigrants, right? They don't have this knowledge in technology, and it is so hard for them to grasp, right? So again, even coming back to that question previously, as personal experiences through COVID, I felt connected because I had my iPhone right with me all the time, connecting with my friends on all these apps, calling them, FaceTiming them. But we have to recognize how hard it can be for older adults to learn technology, right? At such age too, right? And giving them the opportunity. And that's why another great programming is what, even at my work, we teach the seniors how to use their technology and how to master it. So again, it's all about opportunities, not only for youth and for younger generations, but also for our older adult demographic.
Hey, thank you, Mira. Well, wonderful suggestions. I really want to thank all of our panelists because we've had such a great conversation. In particular, I think, as we wind up on this last question. So just in summary, some of the key things to remember is to look at a person as an individual, not as an age. Be open, say hello, greet people. Make sure that you're not labeling people. And Jamie brought a really good point out. And I think that Mira, you talked a little bit more about it as well, is that ageism as a social problem, and that people within our government in particular need to think about their own attitudes. And, you know, what does it do to a family member when someone in the government says, well, you know, yes, they were an older person who died of COVID, but really they were expendable, because that person that they're talking about is an individual and is important within the family unit that they're part of, and is important, you know, to so many others in their lives. And then, you know, making those assumptions, you're in a wheelchair, so you obviously, you know, can't think for yourself. Tom brought about, you know, the intergenerational piece about volunteering, and particularly older people finding a chance and opportunities to volunteer with youngers. And Mira, you had some really good points, because, you know, if you are a senior and you're saying, hey, I'm isolated, hey, I need help, but then when that younger person calls you, you put up a wall simply because they are younger, but this person is also a younger person that's reaching out, who's taking that time to want to engage with you. And it's so important, I think, for all of us here, to take what we've learned today and take it out into our communities and into society, and to share it. So thank you so much to Mira and Tom and Jamie and Tammy. We really appreciate your input today and the time that you took to prepare and be at our Lunch and Learns. And I will turn it now over, I guess, to Kathy.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dorothy, for moderating this amazing session. I found it so encouraging and inspirational to listen to this intergenerational panel share their views on ageism. And it seems to me that we probably have more in common than we think. And that while it's really important to remember that each one of us is unique and individual, what we do have in common is that we are all aging, no matter what age or stage we are at in our lives. So let's continue to the conversations. Let's continue to build bridges of understanding and knowledge on this issue of ageism, and finding ways to connect in meaningful ways. So thank you again to each of our panelists and to our moderator. And thanks for all of you who joined us today on Zoom. There is a short survey of this event that we will be sending out. And also just to let you know that there's also an upcoming Lunch and Learn in November, on November 16th. And the topic is going to be preparing healthy meals for one. So please register for that. And thank you again for joining us today at this age-friendly Edmonton Lunch and Learn. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dorothy and Kathy, for hosting. A really wonderful time sharing my experience with everyone.
That was great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks so much.
Just say thanks for the invitation, and actually I might be looking forward to that next one on lunches. I might even have to join you.
That would be great. That would be good, Tom.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and everyone also. And thanks for the opportunity again.
Thanks, Mira.
I'll stay in touch.
Yeah, great. Do that. Bye, everyone.